Hi, my name is Dr. John Repole, and tonight in this short segment we're just going to talk about some of the roadblocks to weight loss, and we're going to talk about three hormones in particularly. We're going to talk about insulin, we're going to talk about cortisol, and we're going to talk about the thyroid hormone. So we'll take one step backwards. The adrenal glands, which sit on top of our kidneys, they produce a hormone which is referred to as the stress hormone cortisol. The thyroid gland, which is located right here, produces a number of hormones, and we call them T3 and T4, but those are referred to as the thyroid hormones. And then we have the pancreas, which makes a hormone called insulin. So let's start here. So we eat food, all our carbohydrates say that we're eating. The goal of digestion through the esophagus and through the stomach and the small intestine is to break these foods into smaller components, and the smallest of the component would be, say, sugar. When the sugar goes into the bloodstream, there's a little alarm bell that goes off. The pancreas squirts out a little insulin. That insulin is like a little boat. It goes and it finds the sugar. It takes the sugar onto the boat. And then there's a docking station on each cell, and the muscle cells in particular initially. And it docks onto the cell surface. It excretes the sugar. The sugar then finds its way to a little factory warehouse in the cell called the mitochondria. It burns, and we produce the currency of energy in the human body called ATP, and all is well. So dysfunctions that can occur is primarily through the diet that we eat. So insulin resistance will eventually lead to diabetes or blood sugar handling issues, because the goal is to get that sugar from the blood and into the cells to be used and burned. So when you're eating a diet that's really high in processed foods and sugars, what's going to happen is your body's going to be pumping out a lot of insulin. And when the cells start to get a little resistant because the insulin levels are just always elevated, and particularly the muscle cells say, no, we don't want you to deposit the sugar here anymore. So what happens is insulin takes that sugar and converts it into triglycerides and then stores it as basically fat in our adipose tissue. And so now we get a conversion of sugar into fat. And this primarily always happens with processed foods when we're eating too much, right? Because the excess sugar then is going to be converted into fat. This also happens when we're eating a lot of saturated fats, and saturated fats come from animal products. So the fat gets incorporated into the cell wall and inside the cell, and it blocks the signal transduction of insulin being able to deposit the sugar inside the cell, and the same phenomenon will happen. It will increase our blood sugar levels and then deposition of fat. We switch gears now and look at the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands, they produce a hormone called cortisol, which we refer to again as the stress hormone. And when our body, evolutionary was under stress, the idea was that we need to store fat because we don't know when the next famine is going to come. Today though, we live in an environment where we're always stressed out, right? Stressors are supposed to come and then disappear. But some people live with the monkey mind, basically carrying along psychological stressors throughout the entire day. And then this is on top of or compounded by the fact of, say, physical stressors as well. So when we have an increased amount of cortisol directed into the bloodstream, it directs the body to take fat or store fat around the abdominal region. And that's just a protective mechanism of why that occurs. And eventually, as cortisol is being abused because our body is under a great deal of stress, it will eventually go down, and we'll get something called adrenal fatigue. And when the ratios of cortisol and the other hormones in the adrenal glands get mixed up, we see a trajectory of decreased energy, decreased libido, increased fat around the abdominal region. We see a more difficult time increasing muscle mass, and then again problems with sleep. And so this trajectory is very common and has a lot to do with this hormone called cortisol. And then the third one is the thyroid. And this requires a lot more investigation than we typically get done. Typically a doctor will run what's called the TSH test, and this is called thyroid stimulating hormone, which is produced by the brain, which then tells the thyroid to stimulate it to produce the thyroid hormones. And a lot of times when you order blood, these can all be normal. But the number one cause of hypothyroidism, meaning a decreased production of the thyroid hormones, is a medical condition called Hashimoto's. And Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease and needs to be treated as an autoimmune disease and not a thyroid primary problem. And this is a complex issue, very easy to test for, but there's some additional tests. So when you know and you feel in your heart, you know that you're doing all the right things, say with the food, you're building that great foundation of diet and lifestyle. And in our office, we encourage, of course, the diet should be 100% pure, plant-based nutrition, whole food plant-based nutrition. But when you're doing all the right things and you're still having a difficulty time losing weight, it's time to dig deeper and look at these 3 roadblocks. So again, in brief, it's cortisol, the thyroid hormones, and insulin. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed it.